All right, so what we're going to do, we're inshallah going to be doing Seerah, but this is for a kids level. So this is only for the kids level, but the adults can tune in as well. So the Prophet ﷺ was in an area in Mecca. Now, in Mecca, things were actually looking different. The people there were so obsessed with money, just like today. Not only were they obsessed with money, but they were also infatuated with nobility. It's important to mention when we talk about nobility, we're actually talking about that at that time, the tribe played an important role. So you would have people, yes, their religion, it was about worshiping things that they had made. So these little birds and the society at the time, they were really into worshiping. It wasn't just idols, but they were of different creatures that they probably would make different kinds of idols in order to worship them. Well, here's one thing. Sometimes they wouldn't necessarily worship it directly, but they would regard that idol as representing maybe power, maybe fertility, getting children. That sometimes the different gods might actually resemble maybe security, different things. So each and every single one would basically buy and make their own gods to resemble that. Did they believe in Allah? They believed in Allah. No, they did. They believed in Allah, but they believed that these idols were going to somehow remind them of Allah and that it was going to get them closer to Allah. Other things that they did, they actually buried girls alive. Why would they bury the girls alive? They're like, oh, when they grow older, they're going to start having boyfriends, so might as well just bury the girls alive. That was called infanticide or wa'dil banat. It was a common practice. Well, it wasn't just burying the girls alive, but they would even sell and buy especially the girls and people. Now, here's one thing. They did have the Kaaba. Well, the Kaaba at the time was built really off the basis of how Prophet Ibrahim and Prophet Ismail had built the Kaaba. Prophet Ibrahim and Prophet Ismail built the Kaaba. How did Prophet Ibrahim and Prophet Ismail actually build the Kaaba? Were they during the time of the Prophet ﷺ? No. Prophet Ibrahim was almost almost 4,000 or 5,000 years before the Prophet ﷺ. All right? Before the Prophet ﷺ. The Kaaba was not even there. Mecca, the whole city, wasn't even there. So what was there? It was really just a plain desert. There was nothing there. It wasn't until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told Prophet Ibrahim that he has to take his son Ismail and his wife Hajar and leave them in that area of Mecca. Hajar was really confused and bewildered. Why would you leave us in this plain desert area? But she didn't get a response. So she just said, did Allah order you to do this? He nodded with his head. Yes. So she responded, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would not get us lost. He would not forget us. He would not whatsoever put us in a situation where we're just going to die out here. Latifa, you're a co-host, so please, and Samsam, so admit people, please, if I forget. So what happened is that they stayed. Prophet Ismail was just a baby, and we know the story that he was trying to get some water, still, dehydrated. So he started moving his legs, and then the malaika would burst the water and gush the water of Zamzam from underneath his feet. We know the story, right? Now, Prophet Ismail, at the time, it was just him and his mom. But it wasn't until a tribe coming from Yemen called the tribe of Jurhum, that's when they made a deal with the Sayyidah Hajar that they would use the water and they would live within that area. And in other words, basically make a living. Prophet Ismail then marries, when he gets older, marries somebody from their tribe later on. Of course, the people are there, they start having kids, they start basically getting married, and the tribe was getting bigger and bigger and became sub-tribes. We're talking about almost 3,000, 4,000 years of time. Now, Prophet Ibrahim and Prophet Ismail, yes, they built the Kaaba and they were bringing in the basis that they were supposed to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but with time, a guy named Amr ibn Luhay, so we're talking about 3,000 years after Prophet Ismail, Amr ibn Luhay, he basically went to Lebanon in Syria. In Lebanon and Syria, they were considered an advanced country, advanced city. And he was like, well, I wonder what made that country advanced and why these people are civilized like that. So he basically thought, well, these people were worshiping an idol called Hubal. So he basically said, that's probably the secret to why they have a great civilization. It's Hubal. So if I were to bring Hubal to the city of Mecca, maybe we can be civilized like them. He brought the idol of Hubal. People started getting introduced to the idol of Hubal. It started becoming a trend. People started practicing it, and people started considering that Hubal is their new god. How did it become a trend? Well, if this is the king of Mecca, and people were, of course, this is the king, he would start introducing it, of course, in their system. People, the rich people want to imitate the rich people, and they would start wanting to practice like them because it was a sign of like an upper class, a prestigious thing. So it becomes a trend. Everybody was then practicing this type of worship. Well, there are some people that did not blend in with the trend. Only 4 people. Those people were called al-Ahnaf. Now, these 4 people, they didn't get a lot of acceptance, certainly, and the majority, you could see they were putting these idols, and here's Hubal, and they would start basically slaughtering animals for them, and they would basically just live the life where it's the rich that decides, that rules, and it's the poor that gets abused. Well, these 4 people, they recognized that idol worship was not right, but these 4 people, they didn't really know how to get to what is right. So you had one of them was Waraq ibn Nawfal. Waraq ibn Nawfal, he didn't want to worship the idols, but he decided to learn from the scriptures of the Jews and the Christians. So Waraq ibn Nawfal would study those scriptures. He didn't know much more, but he would study those. The other guy was Sa'id ibn Amr ibn Nufayl. Now, he's actually related to Umar ibn al-Khattab. He, or Amr ibn Nufayl, Sa'id is his son, but Amr ibn Nufayl, he, he wanted to stay away from the idol worship, but he didn't know what to do. So what he did was he decided, I'll go migrate and travel to Syria, maybe learn from the scriptures there and get some information. He went there, but when he came to the Jewish rabbis, they told him, well, yes, the scripture does say so and so, but we don't actually abide by the scripture. We have our own interpretation. So Amr decided, this can't be right. I'm actually looking for the authentic interpretation, not a new man-made virgin. So he went to the Christians and they said, well, yeah, the scripture says something like that, but we actually have our own interpretation. Our priests, they would interpret it for us to make it livable. And he said, well, that's the same thing that the idol worshippers in Mecca were trying to do. They were trying to make idol worship basically become something that is accessible to them and something that they could somehow see. They wanted to make up their new definition of worship, their new definition of God, because they didn't want to worship like Prophet Ibrahim. So, but he didn't have enough information. He only met the Prophet ﷺ once. And the Prophet ﷺ, when he met him once, he saw that Amr ibn Nufail, we see when they would slaughter the animals and for the idols, Amr ibn animals that they would slaughter. So Amr ibn Nufail, yes, he did find some practice, but on his way back, he basically ends up, he's like, oh, I can't get to what the religion of Prophet Ibrahim is. Well, I could just do a good deed and do good things. So he would basically take the girls that were set for infanticide, the girls that their fathers wanted to kill them and bury them alive, he would just say, well, I'll take those girls and I'll take care of them and give them a chance of life rather than their parents killing them. So he would take the girls and he would have this orphanage and he would just take the girls and take care of them. When he went to Syria, came back and didn't find any information about Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, he basically in the middle of the way, some people they came in to loot him, to basically rob him, and then because they didn't want him a witness or something, so they eventually killed him. He was killed. The Prophet ﷺ later tells us about him, and he said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would resurrect and bring him on Judgment Day just by himself, a nation. The other person that was part of Al-Ahnaf was Ubaydullah ibn Jahsh. But Ubaydullah ibn Jahsh, he basically decided, well, I'm not going to follow the trend, and he became Christian. The other guy, his name was Qis ibn Sa'd al-Iyadi. What was his name? Qis ibn Sa'd al-Iyadi. Qis ibn Sa'd al-Iyadi, he didn't have a lot of information, but he would always tell people, أيها الناس, oh people, اسمعوا وعوا, listen, comprehend, think of what's going on. اسمعوا وعوا, إنه من عاش مات. I want you, he was looking at the world and all he could see is that he was like, إنه من عاش مات ومن مات فات. What we're seeing, we're seeing new people come to life. They basically, new babies and people dying and new babies coming and people dying. But certainly with this cycle, it doesn't just happen with no purpose. ومن مات فات وكل ما هو آت آت. He said there's absolutely one day that all these people that are dying and the new ones, a new generation comes, for sure there's going to come a time where each and every single one, for the purpose that they were created for sure there is going to be a time where they would all somehow be brought back.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. الله أكبر، الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله.
So قصة ابن سعد الإيادي, where did he get that information? Well, it was really deep ponderance. He was thinking really deep. So he was like, well, what I could see, ليل داج ونهار ساج وسماء ذات أبراج ونجوم تزهر وبحار تسخر. He was like, well, what I could see is that there's actually a pattern in the universe. We would see light and then day, light and, well, light, night and daylight, night and daylight. And then you would see ليل داج نهار ساج وسماء ذات أبراج. He was like, you look at those stars as well. We could see that through by looking at the stars that there is a pattern. He's like, well, what the pattern is telling us, that there is a pattern in the universe, a pattern that's controlling the universe, and therefore, just like we would get to square one in everything in the universe, then we, as being part of the universe, we're actually following a certain cycle. There is a cycle that basically controls our life. That's what he wanted to get to. So he would tell his people, يا معشر إياد أين الآباء والأجداد أين الفراعنة الشداد. He would tell his people, oh people of Iyad, where are your tribes? Where are forefathers? Why didn't they come back? Did they just like staying and they're dead and they decided, hey, I guess we'll just stay in this new life that we're living? Why didn't they come back? He was trying to basically tell them that there is something that's controlling the universe, and this cannot be the end of life. But he still did not have any information. Is it because they weren't smart enough? Absolutely not. They were smart. They were seeing certain patterns. They were seeing certain things, but it's not enough to just be smart and see that there is a pattern. There's a pattern in the universe, but that was not at all helping. Now, the Prophet ﷺ, himself, the Prophet ﷺ himself was actually born during that time. Let's see during that time a little bit and what it looked like. Now, one thing, what they would do is that they would get the different supplies from outside. So they would get the different items all the way from Syria and also Yemen and also Oman. This is barely mentioned. They would also get some items from Oman. Now, these businesses, it was just a trade because that was their only mean of survival. Now, one thing is that they did not engage in a lot of battles. It's important to say so, because a lot of times you would see certain Western books making it seem like Mecca was just always in battles. Actually, there was only one battle called Bu'ath. That was the only battle. They didn't engage in a lot of battles, at least in Mecca, because they couldn't afford to do so. They wanted to make sure that the city was safe enough for the trade to keep coming in. Because if they weren't making the city safe enough, then people would not come in for pilgrimage to Mecca. Pilgrimage. Why would they do pilgrimage? So Mecca, along with other different places, were actually famous for the trade, were also famous for this holy site. The holy site at the time, it was, yes, filled with all these idols, but all these idols at the end of the day were becoming a common religious practice in the Arabian Peninsula. So they would come in to Mecca for the trade, for the religious site, and certainly because it was a famous place. So they would come to it. So the people of Quraysh, just like here Abu Sufyan, and you've got Abu Hakam and all of those, they would always want to make sure that the area is peaceful, there's no fighting, no war, just to make sure that during those times that nothing would interrupt the trade and their survival. Go ahead, Duha.
How about the war between the sons of Qusay and Kilab, Sister Aisha, before that time? It was like a war between the four brothers.
Right. Those battles, they were rare. They weren't frequent. In Mecca, they weren't frequent. The battles that were frequent were more in Medina. In Medina, they were in constant battle, but they could afford those battles. In Medina, they could afford those battles. Why? Because their land is fertile to grow plants and crops, and the climate did actually give them enough water for them to grow crops and everything, but not Mecca. Mecca was not fertile. It's not fertile. And certainly the climate is too hot to grow anything. So that's why they had to depend on trade. It was just business. They would get caravans, merchandise from Yemen, merchandise from Syria, and they would constantly work in such a trade. And the trade, some of it was coming from Oman. So, in other words, getting from India, getting from different countries, and that was considered very extravagant. But they still, at the end of the day, that was their mean of survival. Not a lot of wars. There were some wars. I'm not saying there weren't, but not a lot. And in fact, they made 4 months where not only can there be no battle, but there would be no fighting at all during those 4 months. They were called al-Ashhur al-Hurum. All right, where no fighting at all. Now, another form of trade that was very common was the trade of slaves. The slaves, though, listen to this, the slaves were not necessarily African. So they weren't necessarily African slaves or black slaves. No, they could be white. They could be from the slaves that were coming from probably Syria, Palestine, or some slaves like Suhaib al-Rumi, although he was called Suhaib al-Rumi, but he was actually Iraqi. He was actually Iraqi. He was kidnapped as a young boy, kidnapped and taken by the Roman Empire as a slave, as a young boy, and later he lived in the Roman Empire, and then later he was actually bought as a slave, and with the trade ended up in Mecca. And there were certain good things that were actually a common practice in Mecca. It wasn't, not everything was bad. Some examples were Abdullah ibn Jad'an. Abdullah ibn Jad'an. Abdullah من وين هي؟ Abdullah ibn Jad'an, even though he was a chieftain, but he saw, as an example, saw Suhaib al-Rumi as a young boy, and he decided that he would buy those young slave boys and free them to give them a better life opportunity. Hospitality was a very common thing that they actually did. In fact, part of the hospitality that they would do is basically to serve water and food for the people that were coming for pilgrimage, and the poor as well. So not everything in Mecca was necessarily as bad. In fact, even the Prophet ﷺ actually said, I only had come in order to complete the good akhlaq that they had. They were very hospitable. They always loved to share. And in fact, even if that meant them getting hungry, there were some good things. It wasn't all bad. And so what happened is that there was one thing about the people of the Prophet ﷺ's tribe, Banu Hashim. Banu Hashim, their responsibility was to be as those that would provide the water for the people that were coming to Mecca. Why would they be the ones to provide the water? What gave them that privilege? Why them? Because it dates back all the way to Prophet Ismail. Exactly. Because it dates back from generation to a generation, all the way to Prophet Ismail, that there would basically be the ones to take care of the water, because it was Hajar's ownership from the beginning. Absolutely. So in other words, it became a family inheritance, that they would be the ones to be responsible over the water and to give and provide the water. Well, Abd al-Muttalib was from Bani Hashim. And Abd al-Muttalib, it was a common practice to show that you really care about gods. Once you have a number of children, you basically have to sacrifice one of those kids for the god. What? So he basically decided, well, let me make a draw and see which one I'm supposed to sacrifice. Every time he would make the draw, put the names and make the draw, it would come out for Abdullah, his son, to be the one that he would kill in favor of the idols. So he then went to their priests and told them, well, he's my favorite. I don't want to slaughter him. What should I do? He said, well, then the best thing to do is slaughter 100 camels and give them away. He slaughtered 100 camels just so that he would not slaughter his own son. Time passes by. The Prophet ﷺ, of course, is not born yet. Who is born? Only his father. His father being born, all right? His father being born, of course, then it was time. Sorry about that. This is his father being born. Of course, he was his dad's favorite. But when Abdullah, sorry about that,
Who's that?
that's supposed to be a poet. So he's basically a poet, um, and poetry was something that the Arab absolutely loved at the time. Okay, this is okay. Here we go. Okay. All right. So Abdullah, he basically got older and it was time to get him married. So his father decided to get him married to a far cousin. Where's she from? That far, far person was going to be from Medina. She was from Bani Najjar. Her name was Amina bint Wahab. Amina was basically she was wed to Abdullah. They got married, but it was time, Abdullah, it was time for the trade. You need to get yourself ready and go to Syria for the trade. But Amina is pregnant. That's all right. She'll be okay. Abu Talib will take care of her. She'll be fine. Well, Abdullah went for the trade. In the middle of the way, Abdullah, maybe a heat stroke, dehydration, who knows what it is, but he dies in the middle of the way near Medina. The baby, Amina, was pregnant with this baby. What was his name? What should we name the baby? What name should we give this baby? So Amina was constantly getting dreams that she should name him Muhammad. Muhammad, we never heard of such name, says Abu Talib. How are we going to name a name like that? We've got so many plenty names. Why plenty of names? Why would we name Muhammad? He said, well, I'm getting a dream that I'm supposed to be naming him Muhammad. So Abu Talib agreed that this nephew of his would basically be named Muhammad. Amina didn't know much about raising kids, didn't really know much about taking care of babies, but he's born and Amina would basically nurse him, but they were really poor that she wasn't even getting a good milk supply. So Amina decided, well, with this pollution, my child is going to get sick. With all of this, and I don't have enough milk, and what am I going to do? I don't have any experience in raising a child. Abu Talib would do some work, and sometimes they would even give baby Muhammad, they would even give this baby to even Abu Lahab's slave, Thuwayba. Abu Lahab had a slave, and she would take Prophet Muhammad because after all, she was already nursing her own, and she was already nursing on someone else. Who's that? Hamza ibn Abdul Muttalib. Hamza ibn Abdul Muttalib, who's actually his uncle. So Thuwayba, Abu Lahab's slave, she would take Hamza, nurse him for a bit, and also nurse Muhammad ibn Abdullah, because Amina seems like she wasn't getting a good milk supply. And of course, she's a first-time mom, didn't really know how to deal with babies. So later on, they were like, well, he's right now almost a year and a half, year something, but we actually need to make sure that we take this noble child, but he's already so poor. Well, yeah, but we can at least prepare him to give him a better, healthier lifestyle. So what are you going to do? Well, we've got a plan. every single year, the noble kids, they would basically get taken care of by different people from the cities, the nearby Bedouins. They would take those kids, they would give them the best care, they would give them Lugha Arabiya, they would keep them away from all the pollution, and they would be taken care of by away from the city by these people. And plus, the people, those are basically the nursing moms, they would come in, and that to them was a good income. It was a good income because they would take the noble kids, and the noble families would pay good for those kids in order to basically do like a nanny nursing thing. Well, Muhammad ibn Abdullah didn't actually have the income. His mom didn't have the money. Well, neither did Abu Talib. Well, neither did Amina. And certainly Abdullah didn't leave a huge amount of wealth. It was already summed up. It was already used. And we don't really have much income. But we need to send him away because we don't want him contracting any disease. So what they did is that they would introduce him off to these nursing mothers, and these nursing moms, they would be looking at us like, well, you don't actually pay good. So every single woman would take one noble child, but then all the noble children were taken. There's only one noble child that is left, Muhammad ibn Abdullah. So a lady, her name is Halima Sa'diyah. She was from the tribe of Hawazin, but Halima Sa'diyah, being a poor woman, she was like, well, goes back to her husband. She says, Harith, guess what? There's actually no other noble kid left. There's only one orphan boy. And this orphan boy, his uncle's actually poor too. In other words, I'm not sure we're going to get a good pay. What do you think? So he decides, well, he's an orphan boy. That's okay. We'll just take him. If that's all that we have left, sure. Goes back. And Halima Sa'diyah, she basically decides to take this orphan boy, Muhammad ibn Abdullah. The day that she had taken him, she noticed that everything was actually going different in her life. The food was getting more abundant. Her milk supply was getting better. All the sheep were getting more supply. She was like, there is something that has really changed in my life. When it was the following year, Muhammad ibn Abdullah was already 2 years old. It was time to take him back. But she took him back and she decided, actually, I want that same boy again. I don't want another noble kid. I want that same boy again. There is something rather interesting and fascinating about this boy. Who was telling us the story of what really happened? It was Halima Sa'diyah herself, when later, after almost 53 years, she had become Muslim. She was the one that told us the story. So she would come back, Halima Sa'diyah, and go to Amina and say, I want to take him again. She takes him again. But then, one day, when he was almost 4 years old, When he was almost 4 years old, the boys were playing with Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. All the boys being, of course, in this fun entertainment, all of a sudden, a man appears from nowhere, or two men appear from nowhere. They would come over to actually take Muhammad. Now, he didn't surrender. He was fighting them and wrestling them like a grown man. It's like, I'm not going with you. But they managed to overcome him and take him. Now, the boys were actually seeing all this, the other boys, so they ran to Halima Sa'diyah and said, listen, he's actually in danger. Two guys came over and they were trying to take him, wrestle him, so come and see what's happening. She comes over and she sees that his face, and there was a scar on his chest. Later, the Prophet ﷺ tells us the story that two angels had actually come to him in a shape of a human being. They told him, we're going to take away the shaitan in you. They open up the chest and take out something and say, this is what shaitan would use to control you, and take it out. They would wash it and put it back in. That's all he saw. Halima Sa'diyah, her observation was she saw that his face had turned into a different color. There was a mark on the chest. There was something different. I don't know who these two men are. So she didn't want to be held liable and responsible for any of this. So she thought maybe it was the jinn, but something different had happened. I don't want to be liable. So she goes back to Amina and she tells her what happened. And she says, I don't want to be held liable, but there is something different. I don't know what it is. So she decided to leave Muhammad ibn Abdullah. Now he's almost 5 years old, 5, 6 years old, decided to leave him with Amina again and not take him back. It wasn't long enough. Amina dies. His mother dies. Now he's orphaned a second time. The first time it was Abdul Muttalib. Now he lost his mother, and now he's basically left with Abu Talib to take care of him. But Abu Talib was already poor. Abu Talib already had 9 kids of his own. He can't even he can't afford to feed 9 kids and even afford to take care of him. What can he do? So at age 7 and 8, Muhammad ibn Abdullah was now forced to get a job for a 7-year-old. How is that even possible? Well, he can learn how to mind sheep and take care of the sheep. For a 7-year-old, yeah, he'll learn. He'll get the hang of it. Because even if you're 7 years old, it doesn't mean you're not smart enough to make choices and make the right things. So he would take care of the sheep, and he would basically support his uncle in making the money happen, where they would sell the milk, they would sell sheep, and he would basically do that job. 2 years later, his uncle, I lost it. We're going to start the prayer. 2 years later, his uncle dies. Well, I actually confused that. His father, Abdul Muttalib, dies at 8, when he was 8. So we're going to pray and come back, inshallah. For those that would like to join in the story, you could join us.
Yeah, that's what I was going
الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
You can turn on the light.
Hey, why turn on the light?
The first one, please. Kill the first one first. Yeah. يلا جينات جاي كمان وين جينات يلا كمان جينات
الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. استغفر الله. استغفر الله. استغفر الله. اللهم منك السلام ومنك السلام. تبارك يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. سبحان الله والحمد لله. الله أكبر بخمس. Saturday, Sunday, there's no school.
Yeah.
No, but then you guys
also six. حذيفة هي لا 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 the water حذيفة went in the gutter and then I kicked it.
I think I'm at the very soon, right?
Yes.
Eugene's gonna be 9 next week.
Should we continue?
Yes.
So we can have you guys leave early.
Yes.
How about that? هلا كمان شوي يعني 120
120 لا
اوكي اقعد عشان اسوي
15
اوكي استنى شوي
اوكي بس وترى انا هنعمل توفيق
No, December 8th. 2 weeks, which is in 2 weeks. What? How are you going to do this?
Should we continue, guys? So I can let you leave early, like 1:15. How about that? Not bad. So just half an hour.
What time?
Hmm?
You said 1:15?
Yeah, inshallah. Yeah, 1:15, inshallah, we'll leave.